afternoon, family. It is so good to be with you all tonight as we continue with our Facebook Live programs at Scarritt Bennett Center. Again, my name is Reverend Charisma Jean-Marie, and I'm the Director for Racial Justice Ministries at Scarritt Bennett. And tonight's discussion is entitled Black Women, Grief, and the Mothering Spirit. Black women, grief, and the mothering spirit. This conversation is designed to acknowledge the unique ways that Black women are in relationship with motherhood and grief, and the unique ways that we experience grief through motherhood in a number of different ways. Motherhood is complex for a number of different reasons for us. And so tonight we want to name some of those complexities. We want to name some of those experiences, and we want to acknowledge and affirm the ways in which we live in this world with grief as Black women. And so to begin, I want to first introduce our moderator for tonight. The moderator tonight is Dula Prevalon. She is an ordained minister. She's also a grief counselor, and she's the founder and CEO of a nonprofit organization called Elevate Her International. She travels the country, the world, different continents, where she's hosting grief and trauma retreats for women, for Black women, as it relates to grief and trauma. And so we're so grateful to have her tonight to moderate this discussion. I couldn't think of anyone that I can trust who would be able to carry this conversation with care. Beside the professional, I do want to acknowledge the personal relationship that we have. She is my sister in love. My brother did the best thing he could ever done, and he chose the woman that I chose for him. And married Dula, and so grateful for the gift. So grateful for the 3 gifts that she's given me, my 3 nephews of 9. I have 9 nephews, and she's given me 3 of those. And so I'm so grateful for her. And Creole, and I'm also the godmother of 2 of the twins. And so in Creole, we call each other Makome. And so I'm so grateful. I am so grateful to have her tonight. Beloved, if you have any questions or comments, we ask that you will please put them in the comments that we might engage you at some point tonight. We would love our panelists. We have an esteemed panelist tonight, and we would love to engage you tonight. Before I turn it over to Dula tonight, I want to go ahead and proclaim this tonight. We want to claim this as safe space, sacred space, a space where you can come and simply be, remove any kind of shame or regrets that folks tend to have as it relates to grief and motherhood. We want to remove that in this space. We proclaim this space to be sacred and safe because we acknowledge and invite the divine, the Mother God, to be with us tonight. And it's also sacred and safe because you're with us. And so we're grateful for you. It's sacred and safe because I'm here and our panelist is here. And we claim this, we anoint this as sacred space. And so we invite you to take care of yourself. We're acknowledging that this is a heavy conversation tonight. And so we want you to exercise self-care in this sacred space. If this conversation gets too deep for you, it gets too emotional for you, you do what you need to do to take care of yourself. If it's turning off our live, if it's walking away, whatever you need to do, we affirm that tonight. Self-care is a spiritual discipline, and we invite you to practice that tonight as we engage. Again, our discussion tonight, Black women, grief, and the mothering spirit, and it is with great honor I turn it over to you, Dula Prevalon, as our moderator. Welcome.
All right. Well, thank you so much, sis. You spoke so highly of me. I feel elevated, already. So
don't mess it up.
Yeah, that's right. I'll try not to mess it up too much. But as she said, my name is Dula Jean-Louis Prévilon. Americans say Jula Prevalon. That's the closest they can get. That's all right. We'll go with it. But yes, I am the founder of Elevate Her International. And as Reverend Charisma just shared, before we go any further into our scheduled programming and the content that we were going to share, we want to pause a minute to just name some of what's happened in our nation this week. Well, it did not happen this week. We're just discovering it this week because of the gift of social media, a videotape. We're just seeing some of what's been happening behind the underbelly of what we call America. A couple months ago, I was in Uganda doing a trauma training for a group of women. And while I was in Uganda, we had a scheduled segment for grief, for the women to talk about their grief and pain and suffering. After that hour we scheduled for the women to talk about their grief, they were just getting started, and they told us they were not done. This one had something to say, and this one had something to say. And it was in that moment I was reminded that Black people, we grieve communally. We need that space to share our stories, sharing the stories, sharing how we're feeling, sharing what happened, sharing where we were. That's part of the healing. And so this evening, we want to create some space to name Ahmaud Arbery, to name Sean Reed, to name Breonna Taylor that I just learned about just this morning. And each of those names have mothers. And this Mother's Day weekend is complicated for them. It's not going to be flowers and roses for them. These mothers will be in mourning, and every last one of us on this call, on this live webinar, might know other mothers that are mourning this Mother's Day weekend because this is their first Mother's Day without their babies. And so as a community, we wanted to create some time to name the trauma. Senseless murders like that is traumatic. It is traumatic because it's unexpected, and it is complex grief. It throws us into this complex grief, and it is re-triggering. And for mothers, for Black mothers in America, we're constantly navigating joy and pain and sorrow and grief. We're constantly afraid of what will happen to our babies when they leave our house. We're constantly dealing with that pain, with that reminder. And we're constantly reminded that there is nothing we can do. We can't do enough to keep them safe. That's a reality that we have to hold every single day of our lives. So I wanted to give us some time to just name that. And as we're talking, again, as you can hear, that we're not just talking about these names individually, because when something happened to one person in the Black community, it happens to all of us. That's why when one wins an Academy Award, we're all celebrating, because it's not just their win, it's our win too. And the same thing for when one is grieving. We have to pause and grieve, because we know that it could have been our son, it could have been our nephew, it could have been our cousin, it could have been our father, it could have been any one of us in the community. And so we stop and pause to name those losses, to grieve. So I want to give the ladies on the webinar, on this live webinar, to name, how are you feeling? How are you doing handling this loss? I wanted us to model, how we as women who have this mothering spirit, to just name, how are you doing on this weekend of Mother's Day in light of all these murders that have taken place in our nation? So any one of y'all can jump in. Don't be bashful. I see Jasmine. Jasmine, would you like to share? How are you, Jasmine?
I rested yesterday. I stayed in the bed all day and all night because that's just what I needed, mind, body, and spirit. I will say today, I woke up feeling so much passion in my heart and in my spirit. And though this is it was a very tragic experience, and we received more news about a tragic experience today. Their lives are definitely not in vain, and their spirits will live through the work that I do. So I'm on fire. I'm
Thank
ready.
you, Jasmine. That's awesome.
I'll say cycles of frustration, cycles of pain, cycles of motivation. As an academic psychiatrist, I'm not only a provider in terms of seeing patients and working with trainees, whether they're medical students or psychiatry residents, family medicine residents, and trying to stay focused on training them to recognize and help people acknowledge the different layers of trauma that they may or may not be aware of. But at the same time, I know I can't stay in that space all the time. And so I have to have some time where I am refueling, as Jasmine stated. So I took a long walk yesterday. I was intent trying to get to 30,000 steps. I only made it to 24,000, but it was a good day in terms of some walk and the sunshine outside. And then actually most of today, I've been unhooked from media. I haven't been watching the news or anything. I've been connecting with friends and family, wishing them happy Mother's Day, mothering spirit for those who haven't raised children themselves, but have been very involved in children's lives. So I've have to intentionally balance on the weekends or in the week, in evenings, from the intensity that I deal with during the week. So cycles of frustration, but also finding some peace and rest.
That's good. Thank you for sharing, Doctor.
You're welcome.
I would share just tired, because sometimes we just keep hearing these things over and over again. And like Dr. Williamson said, it's frustrating because you're like, when is this going to end? When are we going to stop hearing these stories about another man or another young woman being beat down? So that's just me, tired. And I've also turned off the news because that protects my well-being, so I don't have to, feel that all the time. But just the sense of tiredness.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing, Amalia.
I am deeply unsettled. I am unsettled for Black women, Black mothers, Black mothering spirit folk. I'm deeply unsettled with white silence and complicity. I am coming to this particular Mothering Day with very multi-layered experience, and we'll get into that later. But I'm ready for change. I'm ready for us to create and build our own spaces, divesting from a system that was created to destroy us, so that we can insulate ourselves and heal, peace, and progress.
Yeah. Thank you, Lyvonne.
I would say I kind of have learned to sit with a slow burn of rage. I allow myself to just be angry about these things. Because I think I don't want the anger to consume me, but the moment where I can't be angry with the fact that our dignity as human beings is not honored, something else from me, right? So I absolutely can find joy in moments of my life and live in a space of contentment. But when I acknowledge the people who won't go home to their families because somebody decided we weren't worth a jury process, breathing, we can't jog, we can't walk, we can't go to the grocery store, we can't have parties. Yeah, I have rage and I'm okay with it.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Yeah. Reverend, would you like to share? Charisma, would you like to share anything? Your thoughts on how you feel?
Yeah, thank you for including me. I say ashe, and I meant to everything that was said today. I'm angry, and I'm also triggered by my own personal loss of my nephew. And so senseless death of Black and brown bodies consistently.
Yeah.
It's just triggering, and I'm exhausted of having to carry the burden in the morning of these by ourselves. This is a humanity call, and I said that on my Facebook page. We're looking for all human beings, regardless of race, to join in the cry, but also the fight to end this. This is not a Black issue. This is not a Black mother's cry. This is a mother's cry. This is a humanity's cry. And until our nation cry the way we cry for when white mothers lose their children, that we join in the cry for Black mothers, we who believe in freedom should not rest. I borrow those words from our beloved ancestors who shared that with us when they were dealing with the same issues in the 60s that we're dealing now in 2020. And so I hope that we have several of our brothers and sisters who are not Black who are watching tonight, who can hear from Black women that it might inspire them to join in, because white silence is killing us all.
Yeah. I would say amen to all of what you all shared. I instantly went numb because it was just too much for me to handle. Partly because I have 3 Black sons, and on the morning where the video was being shared on Facebook, my oldest son, he's an athlete, and with coronavirus, he can't go to the gym or anything. He went on a long run in our neighborhood, and my heart just sunk. And I'm numb. I had to numb out a little bit. And I think numbing is a survival technique, and it's a coping mechanism. And sometimes you have to walk away in order to handle the bigness of the trauma that's happening. And so for me, I have not yet watched any of the videos. I don't know if I will. I think it's just too much for me. I think as Black women, we have to know when it's just too much for us, and when we can give ourselves permission to step out. As Reverend Yolanda shared, I too have this rage inside of me. Sometimes I'm afraid of it, because sometimes I'm afraid of it because I don't want my rage to turn into hate and turn into this thing. It turned me into this thing of a person, but I also need the rage to keep me alive in a sense. So I'm managing all of these emotions: numbness, joy, rage, and there's a space for all of that. There's space for all of these emotions, and we have to have space to be able to be human, to have these emotions, because these emotions are human emotions. And so I'm still trying to figure out how to handle the murders of these young souls. On Thursday or Friday, was it? I walk every day. I have to do some physical activity. So walking helps me kind of move the grief. And I know some of you are either doulas, massage therapists, about movement. For me, I have to move the pain. And so that's been helping, but it's here, you guys. And I know I can hear in all of you, it's here. The pain and grief and loss of Black women, it's here. I just have to manage it. Thank you all so much for sharing. Thank you for being vulnerable and just allowing the world really into that space of navigating the murders of young people young Black people in America. So I appreciate you all. So deep breath. Whew. Lord have mercy. I need a deep breath. I need a stretch. Whew. Yes, I need a stretch after this because we're just getting started. Okay. I need a deep breath. So we're going to dive into our topic for this evening. It's really about naming the grief of women, and naming the pain and suffering of women, and naming also healing. What does healing look like? And how can we reimagine? I mean, we need to imagine a space where women can be whole, women can heal. What would that look like? So first up, I want to call Dr. Williamson to talk to us a little bit about that topic. And you can reintroduce yourself, tell us a little bit more about you if you haven't shared more, but tell us a little bit more about the topic that we are discussing this evening.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with this, to deal with this very important topic. My name is Dr. Loida Williamson. I'm chair of the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at Meharry Medical College in Nashville, Tennessee. And I'm board certified in child and adolescent and adult psychiatry. This is a very important topic in mental health, but particularly for people of color in terms of dealing with grief and the mothering spirit. Somebody used the word layers earlier. And I think really when I'm dealing with patients in my practice, we're dealing with peeling back layers of issues that have been unaddressed and emotions that have been unaddressed. And often grief is one of those bottom layers that we're trying to get to. What we see are the anger or the aggression, arguments. We see those emotions, but underlying that is often grief. And I wanted to start this conversation by talking about some of the issues related to family of origin and grief that we're not aware of. And in our complex culture as Black people, because we're not all African Americans, we're Caribbean Americans or Central Americans or Africans, right? So we come from different spaces, and those spaces have their own issues. So for example, if you're dealing with individuals who have been on the US continent for the United States on the North American continent for a number of years, generations, their grief issues with trauma may be a little bit different. Individuals may have grown up in a supportive family with a supportive social network, but looking back at the generations of sacrifices that may have been made by mothering figures, either making a sacrifice and not being available to children as they were growing up, people can experience that as a sense of loss. Where was my mother? She was off doing her career while I was growing up. Or individuals who maybe didn't have that supportive family network and were then raised by a grandmother or an auntie or another family member, experiencing a sense of loss and grief about where was my mother and why wasn't she there for me. Then we're talking about the layers of racism and how that has played out over a number of years. So that impacts the communities we live in, the jobs that we take, the schools that we attend. It impacts the prevalence, the dealing with substance use disorders and mental health disorders and lack of access to general medical care. And many of our individuals, mothers, grandmothers, other mothering figures dying because of lack of access to healthcare. One of the things that is definitely in the news is that as Black women, whether you have a degree or not, we're still at risk for losing our lives in childbirth, because physicians don't understand or don't take us seriously when we start making complaints about various physical complaints. And then thinking about our mother figures and the mothering spirit and how those struggles may not have been shared with us. And so they're dealing with their private pain, and then there's a wall between us, and we don't understand why there's a wall. They're trying to protect themselves and protect us, but we receive that as being negative. And then we take a posture of anger or resentment to that mothering figure. I'm pleased that our panel and people here are representative of individuals who have immigrated, families have immigrated, because that brings a whole other set of issues. What was left behind? Family members left behind.
Yes.
Years left behind. Financial stability left behind. Degrees left behind. Coming to start over and having to go through the process when you've already validated yourself at your place of home, right? And people process that differently. Some people speak about that freely, but others, that's very painful. And again, if our relatives are not sharing that and we don't understand what's going on, we can receive that negatively and take a posture of anger or take a posture of just feeling left out or isolated. So there are lots of things that we are grieving in multiple layers. That's not to mention our own individual losses, whether it's the fact that we have not been in a relationship that we've been able to have kids and become mothers as we wanted to, or whether or not we've had miscarriages and multiple miscarriages, and the opportunity of motherhood just seems to be continually eluding us. So there's many things that come out in terms of grief. Sometimes that grief is justified, and other times it's our perception of what's going on. And unless we've had the time to really talk that through, give voice, as you said, to someone else or another community, we are dealing with those emotions in a way that build up layer after layer. And then we bring those emotions to our children when we have them, or our relationships, long-term or short-term. And sometimes that negatively impacts those relationships such that we're overprotective of those children and don't allow them space to grow. Other times, our unrealized dreams, we put them upon our children instead of allowing them to choose their own path. So there can be so many areas of grief and loss, not to mention careers or financial loss or health problems because we haven't had access to health care. And all of these things can be unconscious. And then all of a sudden it comes out in anger, it comes out in frustration, hostility, and we're wondering where it came from. So I think one of the things you mentioned earlier is finding a place to give voice to that and to just be able to talk and acknowledge, identify, put a name on that feeling. Is it anger? Is it depression? Is it loss? What is it? And then realize sometimes the loss that we're experiencing is because we had so much invested in that one particular relationship, or that so much invested in being a mother, or being in that relationship, or connecting with our mother, so that when our mother figure died, we now feel like a sense of loss and hopelessness. So as we identify these things, it's important to acknowledge the loss, name it, and then step back and do some reflection. How can we do that? Do that in a community, do that with a best friend, do that with a family member, perhaps even do that. We have our spiritual leaders here, do that with a spiritual leader, do it with a therapist, but being able to find some place that's safe to be able to process that. Because if we don't process it, that layer is going to smolder and explode at some point and cause some negative reaction. Acknowledging that some of our expectations are unreal. Expecting perfect parents, expecting a perfect mother, expecting individuals to never make mistakes and not allowing them to be themselves and make mistakes and give and forgive them when they didn't share because they didn't know how to share or didn't feel it was safe to share. Acceptance of those individuals and acceptance of ourselves with the phase of life that we're in is so important. As we talk about trauma in the community, there are things that we cannot control, but we can control how we choose to deal with these emotions. So there's just a few thoughts that I mentioned.
Thank you so much, Dr. Williamson. I know as you were sharing about the layers, I know I found myself looking at my layers as you were naming each one. I'm like, I have this one, I have that one. Thank you so much. It feels like a breath of fresh air, just hearing you name them and giving some pathways towards healing. Thank you for sharing. Sharizna, any questions? Do we have any questions yet? So we can move on.
Yeah, we'll
go
move
to the
on.
next.
We'll do questions once the panel all have spoken, then we'll go into questions. But this is a great reminder that our audience can write questions in the comments and we'll address them after everyone has spoken.
Okay, that sounds great. Well, next up we have Reverend Lyvonne Proverbs. She's a pastor and founder and CEO of Beautiful Scars. Reverend Lyvonne, please tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do and weigh in on this topic that we're talking about.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So I'm Pastor Lyvonne Proverbs, MDiv. I am a body and sex positive womanist healer. I show up in the world as a pastor, a preacher, a poet, a writer, a transformational speaker, seminar leader. And I show up centering the stories, experiences, and vantage points of Black women. I am an Afro-Caribbean pastor, and so I look at ancient West African spirituality. I look at the rituals and traditions of my people from Barbados and Guyana, and I tie it all together to create a framework for Black women to take a deeper dive into uncovering their spirituality, to recovering their sensuality, and to discovering their sexuality. For many people, they think that my being a body and sex positive pastor is about wanting to have really great sex all the time. And that is true. I do want to have healthy, consensual, pleasurable sex. However, it's about getting us into our bodies, particularly within our faith traditions. The Black church has historically done a disservice at best and committed a sin at worst by the lack of care around Black women and our bodies. And when you look at Black church congregations, they are 85% Black women. And Black church leadership is not 85% Black women. And so there are a whole host of stories and experiences and nuances that are literally amputated from the pulpit, amputated from our communities of worship. And it's time that if we really are, if you use Christian vernacular, are going to be the body of Christ, right? It is time that we start talking about the bodies of Black women. And so I come to this space as a spiritual leader who is free and no longer at war with her body. I come to this space as a woman who has had multiple abortions at different points in my life. That was the best decision for me. And so not having space carved out in religious and Black religious communities was extremely detrimental to my own healing process. As one who desires to be a biological mother, because I've been mothering in this world for decades now, I suffered a miscarriage in December. And so it's made me think about how I have celebrated every other Mother's Day prior, right? And the ways that we have knowingly and unknowingly, right, further marginalized those sacred tender stories that are in so many of our congregations, the mothers who are living without their own mother for the first time, the mothers who have people who have strained relationships with their mothers. I'm thinking about women and women identified folks who are living with infertility, who have chosen to be child-free, right? There's so much nuance. And because we have been afraid to take a deep dive into sex and sexuality, we have not been talking about Black women's bodies and the physical ramifications of mothering, right? We celebrate new babies. We want to christen them. And that's beautiful and a part of a really great religious tradition, but shaming unmarried women for being pregnant, right? While men are free to just continue to roam and operate in any capacity. Not having conversations with our young people beyond sex before marriage is a sin, which is antiquated ideology anyway, right? If we are not having these conversations, how can we expect people to create ethical, moral, theological frameworks for how they step into their lives? And then as we're thinking about mothering, right, and how loaded this is, my hope is for Black church leaders to shift from all the mothers please rise so we can honor you, to let's take a deep dive into the very gritty, gory stories, right? If I, as a woman who just miscarried, am in a church service and the pastor says, all the mothers please stand, how does that make me feel, right? And when you think about the fact that at least 25 to 30% of all pregnancies end in miscarriage, that is a third of all pregnancies. That's a really high number. And when I came out, and one day we'll get to a point where telling the truth is not considered brave, right, or bold. It just is telling the truth. But people were saying, I had one in December. We had one in April. I had one 7 years ago. And so I'm thinking about silence around our bodies, right? And who does it serve to not share the news that you're pregnant with people until it's safe in the second trimester, right? Where if you do suffer this loss, now you're not just grieving the loss of this pregnancy, you're also grieving the loss of the pregnancy in silence. And as we have seen with this quarantine, we are not designed for isolation. We are not designed for being apart from sacred community. And so to think that there are Black women around the world from different parts of the diaspora who are struggling, excuse me, let me change my language, who are living with challenges with regards to their bodies, and they are not receiving the social support and spiritual support that they need, that is unacceptable to me. And that is just a re-traumatization. And so I seek to amplify these conversations in and beyond Black religious spaces. And it is my hope that we will begin to honor motherhood in the Godhead, motherhood beyond biological mothers, having conversations about race and gender and gender expression, right? And our bodies, like our bodies are holy. Our bodies are sacred. And it's time that we start having holistic conversations that honor that.
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you so much for sharing. Let's shift from silence around our bodies and naming that our bodies are holy and our bodies are sacred. Oh, what a shift that would be in the church. What a shift that would be. Do we have any questions for Reverend Lyvonne, Pastor Lyvonne?
We'll do the questions after. Let all the speakers go, and then we'll do the questions.
All right. Well, up next we have Reverend Yolanda Norton. If you have ever heard of the Beyonce Mass, she is the creator and the curator of the Beyonce Mass, and she will talk to us about this topic right now. Take it away.
Good evening, everyone. I am going to talk about the Beyonce Mass, but I wanted to start by talking about some biblical text. So, because that is my primary profession, is as a professor of Hebrew Bible, and I teach Black Church Studies. And the Mass came out of the scholarly work that I do. So when we met and we talked as a group about this panel, one of the things that came up was the story of Sarah. and her barrenness. And so I began to think about forming introductory remarks based on an evaluation of Sarah's story. And I started off reading Vanessa Oak's books on Sarah. The book is called Sarah Laughed, Modern Lessons from the Wisdom and Stories of Biblical Women. And it approaches the Sarah story from multiple different perspectives. And I realized very early on in revisiting that book and Sarah's story, that probably the kindest way for me to say it is that I have very little patience for Sarah's story. The story, it fails to motivate me because it feels like a very Eurocentric narrative about how we talk about the maternal impulse and grief, right? She wanted something, she had a deep desire for something. She felt limited and maybe was limited from a socioeconomic perspective because she did not have a child. But when she had a child, her life shifted. And so again, that felt very Eurocentric and white for me. And so I realized that I'm more compelled, while I have very little use for Sarah's story, which is probably an unpopular thing, I'm more compelled by Hagar. And I'm more compelled by Hagar because no one cares about what Hagar wanted, whether she wanted to have a child or didn't. She becomes a function for Sarah and Abraham to get what they want in life. And I'm further compelled by her because I realize that she's supposed to be serving as a surrogate for Sarah and Abraham to have this child. But because of the fickleness of Sarah and Abraham, because of her own determination, she finds space and ways to hold on to her own child. And I think that is highlighted in the way that Hagar's motherhood becomes a source of frustration and anxiety and rage for Sarah. And so I think there's something to be said for the tragic ways that no one cares about whether or not Black women want to be mothers. That there's not emotional space for us to name a desire or the lack of desire. No one cares really about our journeying into motherhood. It's just a kind of assumed reality. You are or you are not a mother. There's kind of easy bifurcation created for people in society. And I'm motivated by her because regardless of what the world is willing to do in creating space for Hagar, what we realize is that Hagar is fierce and determined in her motherhood, right? And so we see in the story these moments where she grieves her living son because she understands that the world desires death for him, the world as represented by Sarah, and that his own father is at best apathetic towards his existence, right? To send your son and the mother of your son off into the wilderness with insufficient provisions to make it for even a day, better yet to survive the wilderness. And yet she has the courage to move, she has the courage to weep, and she's able to find space to protect her son in this very tenuous situation. So I find myself more compelled by that model and thinking about Hagar as a precursor to stories like the story of Rizpah that we find in Samuel, this mother who loses a son and in her grief finds ways to be prophetic, not only on behalf of her son, but on behalf of the sons that were lost because of the violence of the state, right? The state-sanctioned violence. And so I think that motivates me more in thinking about Black motherhood and grief. I say that because the more that I thought about this concept of mothering and how we form identity around mothers, these Eurocentric tropes around what it means to be a mom are also useless to me. When I think about my mother, I don't think about someone who baked cookies, who needed to read me a particular kind of bed story every night, tuck me in, kiss me on the head. Those are not and that doesn't make my mother a bad mom, but when I think about the lessons that I gleaned from her, what my mom taught me to do was to fight. She taught me to be a warrior. She taught me a fierce kind of determinism. Anyone who's ever met Mary Norton will say to you, this is a woman who fought to occupy space in the world and was unwilling to yield that space to anyone else. That is what the maternal instinct means to me, is to teach particularly Black girls to own your space in the world, to fight for it and not to yield it to patriarchy, to aggression from white terrorism, that you are who you are and you should be unapologetic for your identity. And so I think for me, what that often means is to have the courage and the strength to say, from a biblical perspective, right, to say, when I mother is my decision. Whether that is the decision to have a physical child, that's my decision. If I'm not going to have children, where I mother in particular moments in the world is also my decision. So I think in particular about my students who are often looking for a particular kind of nurturing response from me, I very much make a conscious decision not to show up for them that way. That's not my job. Because when you desire that from me, you have a hard time understanding what it has taken for me to be in front of you in this space in this way. And so I think of the model of what it means to be a Black woman is to understand that we have choice about how we occupy space in the world, and we have to pass that on to future generations. So I think when I think about that in the context of the Beyonce mass, I'm also really mindful that people are uncomfortable with the mass because of how I privilege Black women. You know, if I say that this is a woman of service, we celebrate Black women, the response I get is often women of color but all people. And I say back to you, I hope that you come into this space, whoever you are, and you find freedom and liberation. But I am celebrating Black women. And why is it that we have a hard time in sacred spaces or secular spaces, but particularly in sacred spaces, in saying today we put Black women first, regardless of how they fit into the paradigms that we have created for them, right? Whether you're a mother, not mother, whether you are biologically a woman, whether you're a trans woman, like however you decide that you arrive in your Black womanhood, in this sacred space, we celebrate you. And that means that you can have a range of emotions. You can grieve how the world treats you. You can celebrate how God created you. And you can make decisions for how you live in the world. And so that's the work of the mass. And I'm ever mindful of how people have a very dissonant response to being in that space because of who we are privileging and how we are privileging them without putting the labels that folks want to put on Black women.
Whew. Yes, yes. The minute you started talking about Hagar, did you see me lean in a little bit? I was like, oh, she talking about Hagar. I've literally been sitting on Genesis 16, just learning about this woman, this dynamic, multi-layered woman, you know? And I just so love what you just shared about just teaching women to own our own space, and when and where we mother is our decision. Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. Up next, and there will be questions for you, I'm sure. Up next, though, is Elmira Lofton. She is a licensed massage therapist, and she will weigh in on the topic as well. Elmira, take it away.
Muted. Okay, there we go. Hey, everyone. I'm Elmira, licensed massage therapist. I actually help you become a self-care boss. I'm your spirit worker and body worker. Here's how I want to weigh in on this, because this is all about scar tissue for me. We all have talked about different scars that we have experienced. And when I'm working with the body, I've been a licensed massage therapist for 12 years now. I feel those scars. They show up, they are real, they are present, starting from what we're dealing with now with the, slain individuals, all of the topics that have come up. Those scars actually present themselves in our body. And I want to use myself as a personal example and talk about my scars, because that's how I got into this. I always joke and say massage is my gateway drug to self-care, because it truly is. Touch is one of the best things we can do as Black women to heal. So some of my scars have been, I grew up in a home with a single mother. I'm one of 6 children, and my mom worked all the time and would be considered that strong Black woman. People say, "Oh, she's the best." But in some respects, I felt unloved. I felt I didn't have enough time with her. And then my dad wasn't there because they split up when I was 5. So I also felt abandoned. So imagine that both my mother and my father didn't have a presence in my life from my position as a child. And that went on up until adulthood. In my 30s, I had to heal from that. And massage therapy is one of those things that release the scar tissue. We don't realize how deep this stuff is, because when you're in that room and you're getting a massage, I know this from receiving and giving, I can feel the stuff being released from the body. And when we don't deal with this, we've talked about this already. Self-care is a spiritual practice. It allows us to get rid of those scars and undo things. And self-care and massage is a proactive way of dealing with it. We get to go into that massage session and say, "Hey, I've been dealing with this thing this week. My mom died, or I'm seeing all this stuff on the TV," and we get to release it. Think about if you're never touched for 5 years or 50 years. I've seen this in my family, and it disgusts me and it disturbs me. That's why I'm a massage therapist myself, because I said I have to heal these scars. Because one thing I realized too, with this scar tissue, we are not only carrying around our own personal scars. We're just like my story. I'm carrying around the scars of my mom, my dad, my grandmother, my great grandfather, the nation. We preface this conversation with that. We are carrying around the scars of all of these things, even the Hagar story from the Bible. Those things, when our sister hurts, we hurt. And if we don't get in that massage session, we can't release it. And the healing comes because this conversation is all about being proactive. I urge each woman here to go get a massage. I know people who are afraid of touch, and they're afraid of touch because of the scar tissue. The tissue is so deep, they don't want nobody to touch it. it's it's that serious. So we have to be welcoming. Like has been mentioned here earlier, we have to understand the layers, and that's really what's going on. When I touch that body, it may show up as shoulder pain because we're walking around overprotective. It may show up as heart pain because we haven't forgiven, and we're full of regret from grief. I believe regret is one of the biggest emotions that will sit in our body. It may show up as foot pain, headaches. Your headache is not just a headache, it could be scar tissue. That's how I want to weigh in on this conversation and let you know that massage can release all of that from your body.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing. I've had clients, exactly what you said, clients who have dealt with trauma who want nothing to do with touch. And so, I often, whenever I work with massage therapists, I ask them if they're aware of trauma. because to be aware of a body that's been traumatized and to know how to approach that body will do so much healing. But if you're not aware and how to be sensitive to approaching that body for touch so that it can produce healing, you can do more harm than good. So thank you so much for sharing and weighing into that. And last but not least, certainly not least, because this woman here, we need to hear from Jasmine. Jasmine Dominique, a holistic birth doula. Please share with us.
Thank you.
Yes.
I just want to express before I get started how grateful I am to be here. You know, sometimes when you're experiencing life, you don't always understand why you're experiencing life the way that you are. Sometimes it's like, why am I going through this? What is this all about? But me being here is actually a testament of faith. And knowing that absolutely every experience is much bigger than me. And I just had that epiphany, so I thank you. Before I start, I must honor a young woman who is now our ancestor. Her name is Amber Isaac. And I just want to read a little bit about Amber Isaac. A pregnant woman tweeted concerns about a Bronx hospital. She died days later. Weeks before she gave birth, Amber Isaac, age 26, told her partner she dreamed she would not survive the delivery. After learning she was pregnant with her first child, the West Bronx resident, a graduate student at Concordia College, spent months poring over information on maternal death. Black mothers in the US, she read, died at a rate 3 to 4 times higher than white ones. She had mentioned to me that she feels like she's not going to make it. Her partner, Bruce McIntyre, 28, told the city, and I would try my best to cheer her up. She would tell her mom she's really glad the baby is healthy, but she's scared that she's not going to make it. Isaac's premonition came true just after midnight on Tuesday, April 21st, when she died shortly after delivering her son, Elias, at Montefiore Medical Center in the Bronx. She died without any loved ones around, but not far from McIntyre, who said he was barred from being present with her during the emergency C-section because doctors administered a general anesthetic. I'll stop there, but I just want to honor Amber Isaac, who in my eyes is a hero, and she sums up why I do the work that I do. So hi everyone, my name is Jasmine Dominique, and I am a mental health clinician. I am a Reiki teacher and specialist as well. I am also a spiritual advisor. I'm an artist, I'm an author. I'm trying to be everything that God has called me to be on this planet. But some of the most sacred work that I do comes from being a holistic birth doula. And a doula is someone who supports mothers, and not only mothers, but the family unit, her support system in general, before birth, during birth, and if she chooses after birth. And Amber Isaac sums up what we do. We teach mothers and families, specifically mothers, how to trust themselves, how to trust what they feel, how to trust their intuition, how to connect with their bodies, how to connect with their minds and their spirits so that they can set a firm foundation for the life that they are bringing into this world. So a very personal story. I believe that being a doula comes with the journey before being a doula. So I was initiated into being a doula. In 2016, I moved back to the United States. I lived in a place called Salvador Bahia, Brazil for 2 years. And I left there because my life in the United States was filled with so much trauma. And I just needed answers. I needed to find my spirit aside from what everyone told me I should be and what I should do. So I lived there for 2 years and God gave me exactly what I needed. Very grateful. And I fell in love with someone. And this person I loved very dearly. And he was a safety net for me. I had just moved back to the country, starting brand new. I had a college education, but no money, master's degree, but no money, looking for jobs, nothing's available. So he became a security, a sense of security for me. And in 2016, I was pregnant, And I wanted to keep that pregnancy a secret. I didn't tell anyone but my best friend, Taylor, who I love so dearly. Thank God for sisterhood. And I carried that pregnancy. I was silent. And when I was experiencing that pregnancy, I was bleeding. And I didn't know what was happening to my body. Keep in mind, I had no money. So I had to depend on the system to provide me with what I needed to receive the help that I needed. I will never forget going into the doctor's office, and it was so cold. I didn't feel like my voice was heard at all. I reached out to the father of my child, and because he was experiencing his own grief from a pregnancy that occurred before he even knew me, he could not interact with me properly. I couldn't tell my grandmother who I was living with because she would have been ashamed. The only person that I had was my sister, Taylor. And eventually I had a miscarriage. This was in 2016. And I didn't know why I was experiencing what I was experiencing then, but now it all makes sense. I know that I have to be a voice for women that feel like they are voiceless, for women that feel like they have to be ashamed, for women who have been led to believe that carrying life is not a normal thing. It is very normal for us to have life in our bodies, and we shouldn't be ashamed. I'm a holistic birth doula. So I work with women to be in tune with their minds. What are you thinking as you're carrying this baby? How are your experiences from your past and impacting the way that you are carrying life, right? Because everything that she is thinking, every emotion that she feels, she's sharing that with her baby. I also work with women to get in tune with their bodies. What does your diet look like? Are you eating foods that are going to nourish you and nourish your body, your baby? Are you eating foods that come directly from the earth? Mother Earth is powerful, and she has given to us absolutely everything that we need. Do you have access to eating healthy foods that come from the earth so that you can nourish your baby? I also work with women on cultivating spiritual health and really defining what spiritual health looks like for them, aside from maybe what they've been taught or forced to believe. When women are carrying life, they become portals. A portal, actually a medium to bring life into this world from the heavens. Some people say the universe. She is a portal, and that is a very, very sensitive time for her. So developing spirituality and knowing what that looks like for her is so important. And more than anything, I work with women to teach them how to trust themselves. I have worked with so many women that did not know that they could go into the hospital to have a conversation with their OBGYNs about what it is that they want, what it is that they need. I've worked with so many women that did not know that they could ask questions when they are working with their medical providers. So I sit with her and I first provide childbirth education if that is something that she needs. If she does feel like she is aware, we explore what it is that she does know. We break through some of the misconceptions that she might have been led to believe, so that she feels fully empowered in her body, her mind, and in her spirit. I also work with women to create birth stories, women and the father of the baby, if she prefers that, to talk about birth stories. Have you had a conversation with your mother to learn about what her experiences were like when she was pregnant with you? Because everything that your mother was experiencing when she was pregnant with you was transferred to you when you were in her womb. So we get beyond the physical aspects that come along with carrying life. We delve a bit deeper. Something that is so powerful that changed my life, and this is why I enjoy working on birth stories with the families that I serve. When we are in our mother's wombs, no, I take that back. When your mother was in your grandmother's womb, you were also in your grandmother's womb because your mother had all of the eggs that she would ever need to bring life into this world, right? So not only am I impacted by my mother's experiences and her journey, I'm impacted by my grandmother's journey. And the cycle goes on and on and on and on and on. So I work with women to choose, and men, right? We got to do this together. So we work on strengthening the family unit. We break down the family unit and we hold on to what we feel is beneficial for us as we move forward, and we let go of what no longer serves us. Something that really shifted my mind, my body, and my spirit, and I think I stayed away from it for so long because to embrace it, I had to go through a season of trauma. So many people within the African American community are still bringing children into this world that are highly impacted by the energy of slavery and everything that came with slavery. So I say that doulas are essential, especially those doulas who will sit with you, be present with you, listen to your stories, learn about your relationships, learn about your trauma, learn about your family dynamics. Doulas are so essential because we can be that neutral person that helps the mother, helps the father to bring situations, memories, trauma, anything to the surface that could prevent that child from entering into the world in a safe space. So that is what my work is all about. The goal is to heal so that we do not have to bring any more traumatized babies into this world, right? If a mother isn't healed, if a mother is suffering from trauma, if she is deep in her trauma, she is going to bring a traumatized baby into this world. And so I work with moms to uncover what needs to be uncovered before baby comes. And again, strengthening the family unit. I want to end by saying this. I want to encourage myself and you all and all mothers to honor the womb. It is said, it has been purported that the womb of a woman holds more memories than the human brain. The womb of a woman holds more memories than the human brain. If we can create physical life there, that's where all forms of creation come from. It's not just the physical, it's a spiritual thing. So I want to encourage us all to speak life into our wombs. Where we've been holding on to the anger of our ancestors in our wombs, we can give that anger the permission to reveal itself, right? Because we need to be aware first, and then we can release it, right? But the womb is sacred and the womb is precious. Our mothers are sacred, our mothers are precious, and they deserve to be informed. They deserve to be advocated for, and they deserve to be protected, and they deserve to be loved because they are bringing the future into this world.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. All of you. I mean, wow, this is just amazing. We also pause to honor Amber Isaac and countless women who lose their lives while giving birth, just giving birth. And so thank you so much, Jasmine, for weighing in on this. Sharizna, would you like to lead us in some of the questions that were posed in the comments?
Ooh, I'm still taking a breath from the deep sharing tonight. Thank you all so much. Wow. There are many comments, and some of the comments I turned into questions, but there is a particular question I want to start with, and anyone can jump in. The question is simple, but it's complex in so many ways. Three-word question: what is love? And I want to add, as you answer what is love, how do you also connect how you answer what is love to radical self-love? What does radical self-love look like? So two-part question: what is love, and what does radical self-love look like? Elmira, you want to start?
Yes, I will start. That's a good question. Love to me is quality time. Anything that we love, we spend some time on. That could be spending time with our children, spending time on ourselves, spending time with God. Because sometimes we look at love as this abstract thing, or people say, is it an action verb or is it an emotion? To me, it's none of that. It's quality time. If you actually love something, you're going to spend your valuable time, because to me, time is one of the most valuable resources. You can spend your time watching this broadcast now to learn some healing mechanisms, or you can spend your time watching Real Housewives of Atlanta, which there's nothing wrong with either. You love what you spend time with. And radical self-love to me is what I've had to put into practice all of these years. I've been doing this deliberately, is like scheduling time to journal, scheduling time to take myself out on a date. Like, I'm not married right now. I don't have any children. And I used to feel bad about that. Now I don't. I'm dating someone, but people used to make me feel bad. You're 42 years old and you don't have a husband and all of this. Radical self-love to me is being happy in my current position and not feeling sorry for myself, because I know a lot of my counterparts feel sorry, and that's okay, because we have to grow, because I was there too. And so that's what it's about, spending that time and doing things to love myself and pouring into me, going to get a massage and not waiting for somebody else to do it.
Someone else, what is love and how does that relate to radical self-love?
Well, love is the epitome of self-acceptance, self-compassion, and self-celebration. And as Black women, that is not something that we are religiously, socially, culturally conditioned to do. We're trained to shrink. We're told that humility is how we're supposed to show our demonstration of faith. And the fact of the matter is that we cannot love ourselves if we don't accept all of ourselves. And so my sister Elmira talking about scars, Jasmine talking about honoring the woundedness of our stories, trauma being passed down from generation to generation. There is so much healing that has to happen in and among Black women, right? The Black Women's Blueprint has been doing an ongoing study since 2011, and they found that at least 70% of Black women are sexually abused before they turn 18 years old. We're not talking about college rape. We're not talking about date rape. We're not talking about male sexual violence that happens later. And so our love languages are distorted at a very young age, because we're not being abused by some random person in a what you call it, in an alley, right? There are pastors, preachers, teachers, our fathers, our uncles, our brothers, our coaches, right? And so love is distorted at a very young age for us. And it's going to take a lot of extraction, a lot of therapy, a lot of massages, a lot of crying, grieving, wailing, honoring our narratives and healing our womb areas, because that's where a lot of this trauma resides, for us to really get to a place where we can look at our lives, accept it for what it is, identify our trauma, integrate it into our lives, not be defined by it. And then we can step into what Nina Simone calls this, I'll tell you what freedom is to me, no fear. No fear is the epitome of self-love. That freedom from your narrative, freedom from shame, freedom from oppression, that is radical self-love to me.
Yes. Yeah.
Yolanda, I'm going to jump in with a question with you, because I'm paying attention to time. The question, as you were talking, how can Black women read the biblical text with the lens of freedom that affirms their experiences in a male-dominant church whose lens can be biased and harmful to women, right? So, and we're not talking about the preacher. We're talking about, right, the woman, the Black woman who sits in the pew every Sunday, right, hearing a sermon that does not offer her freedom, right, or affirm her Black woman experience.
Yeah. So, I'll start by saying what I say to my students the first day of class, which is number one, if you are going to be set free by your engagement with the text, you actually have to read the text. If your relationship with Scripture is limited to what other people are telling you about what's happening in these words, then you will always be held captive to how the text works for other people. The second thing that you have to acknowledge is, like, we've created all of these different relationships and orientations towards Scripture, but the reality of the situation is that what the Bible is a group of people who have a deep relationship with God, trying to make sense of their relationship with one another, their relationship to self, and their relationship with that God. They're trying to figure all of those things out. So some of the greatest harm that we do is to read that text as universally prescriptive, right? Like, so this idea that the Bible is an answer book, it tells you everything about how you should live your life, is a mistake. What Walter Brueggemann says is that we read the text as universally prescriptive when more often than not, it's trying to be descriptive. And that is to say, the Bible doesn't tell you who you should be all the time. More often than not, it's telling you who you are. And so it's trying to make sense of who you are in all of your messiness, in relationship to how you deal with God and who God is. So I think for Black women in particular, we have to be able to read the text and go through the sacred action of saying, that person in that narrative is not moving on my behalf. And we have to put down, in order to do that and do that well, we have to put down some of our idolatry, right? So one of the things that always happens when I walk into the church and I start talking about the Bible is, people are like, but this is the word of God. And I don't think people understand what that means, because the scripture itself says don't make idols. That means you cannot put God into a book. God lives in the book, but God's expression and movement in the world is not limited to that text. That doesn't absolve you from having to engage it, but you have to engage it from a bigger perspective than just to say everything this says is true and right and how I should live my life. So it requires some critical engagement and critical assessment. And again, that sometimes means you have to say, in the same way that I started by saying, I don't have any patience for Sarah. Sarah's story doesn't work for me. And I want Black women to be set free from that story and understanding that it doesn't work for us. In that we're not Sarah, right? Our grief, our mourning does not end when we give birth to children. Oftentimes that's the beginning of our grief and trauma. And that doesn't mean that we don't love and have healthy relationships, but Hagar spent the rest of her life fighting for the survival of that child and herself. That's what motherhood meant for her. That's what motherhood means for us. So it's understanding how stories speak to our realities.
Another question, Yolanda, for you that's connected to how we read the text, but it's also how can Black women transform our worship spaces that are usually patriarchal?
By not mimicking the things that we've seen other people do, right? Like we have decided more often than not, and again, this is where engaging material matters, that what white people do or what Black men do is going to work for us. And we're not willing to take a step back and say, these things were designed to ignore or be violent to our personhood. And so I'm not going to continue to carry these things out because they are tradition. So I need to go and engage this material and understand the evolution of our faith to make sense of how we can contextually design worship so that we can be seen as Black women, heard as Black women, loved as Black women, understood as sacred and divinely created beings. And we have to understand that when we do that hard work, it's going to make people angry. It's going to pull out a kind of vitriol in folks that oftentimes we're not prepared for. But I was very clear, right? When the Beyonce mask came out, for as many people who were as excited about it, there were just as many people who were angry. And when I would say things like, well, you know, we have jazz vespers in the black church and the white church, we have, you know, we had worship services. The white church has Eucharist that uses the music of U2 in sacred space. I was like, you're not upset because we're engaging the secular, because the Bible does that time and time again, and historically, the black and the white church have done it. What you're mad about is that the prototype that we're using, the person that we're engaging, is a black woman. That's what you're angry about. And so I think you have to understand that people have a certain kind of loathing for that intersection of black and woman that will make them have responses that you're not necessarily prepared for. And the best way to move forward is to ignore them. Right? You didn't create my relationship with God. You don't have a heaven or a hell to put me in. Be faithful to your relationship with God, and don't worry about how people are going to respond or critique.
Great. Woo. Pastor Bay, Lyvonne, I have a question for you. The question is, how can we encourage religious Black women to get mental health in addition to their prayer lives? Black women, particularly in the Black church, our mothers of the church, are known to be prayer warriors, intercessors, and it works. And there's another deeper level of hurt that requires something deeper. And so help us, those who are watching tonight, what would it take to get Black women to understand while prayer is a tool that God gives us to communicate, but God also gives us other tools to be healthy and communicate. And so how can we encourage Black women to get mental help in addition to prayer?
Every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Dr. Brianna Boyd FaceTimes me, and we take a deep dive into the depths of my being, okay? I got Jesus, I got scripture, I got prayer, I got yoga, I got therapy, I got meditation. It's a both and. We have to decolonize our faith, decolonize our minds, decolonize our bodies. My sister Elmira brought up this notion of the strong Black woman, which is a trope that is steeped in white supremacy and the dehumanization of Black women's bodies. And it is a false narrative that some of us try to live into as a way to solidify our worthiness. But beloved sister, you are inherently worthy. There's nothing that you need to do, be, achieve. Your being birthed it makes you inherently worthy because you are a child of God. And so to destigmatize mental health, May is mental health awareness month. And it's really critical that we have these conversations, because even Jesus took a moment to go take a nap. Okay, he went alone to be by himself to pray. Like, that's mental health care. And so if this divine being, as you are a divine being, but this one that we model, right, our faith after, had to have those breathers, then beloved, so do you. And so going to see a therapist does not mean you're crazy. Therapy is not just for white people. Your mama, cousin, auntie, and them, they are not formally trained clinicians. Sometimes we need to sit down with someone who is formally trained to help us unpack our trauma and our processes and help us identify why we are the way that we are without force feeding scripture down our throats. So this is just an encouragement to say you can go to Open Path Collective. They are a platform that offers lower cost therapy for people of color, particularly Black women. We can talk about in this space. And so just poke around the website and see what you think.
Yeah.
It's a both.
Can I just jump in on that question?
Yeah.
Because I think it's really important that we realize our brains are an organ of our body, just like our stomach and our heart and our womb. So if we are bleeding continually, we're just not going to go and pray. We're going to go to a doctor about it, hopefully. If we have a heart attack, we're not just going to go to our place of worship. We're going to go to a doctor. So if we are experiencing emotional pain, anxiety, depression, having thoughts of suicide, we need to find a mental health professional. And we have to understand that there are different models of understanding mental health. I commonly talk about the biopsychosocial spiritual, all right? There are biological reasons why we can be depressed if we don't get enough vitamin D, if we don't get enough sunshine, right? Okay. There are psychological reasons for being depressed. If we keep making the same thought pattern, same mistake, thinking about our world and our glasses being half empty instead of half full, a negative perspective, negativity has an impact on our body. Socially, if we isolate ourselves, if we don't do enough to detoxify from all the news, get some physical activity, massage, eat healthy, absolutely, the earth provides great food for us. Not everything that comes packaged with all these lists of 20 ingredients, wholesome, natural foods, drinking water, enough rest. This makes a positive impact on our body, our emotions, and our health. And if we don't do enough to keep those positive things into our physical bank, biopsychosocial and spiritual, I agree with all the panelists that we have to understand that we have value, not because what other people tell us, but because we are created by God and God gave us value. Each and every person from the time of conception has value. He knew us before the womb. God knew us before the womb. She knew us before the womb, whichever perspective you want to take. But God is both he and she. That's why he made man and female in his image. There are parts of God that we all have, but we are in the image of God. We are created by him, that we have value that cannot be taken away from anybody else. And as long as we have that perspective and we value our bodies as his temple, as her temple to communicate with us, then what we need to do is listen to God, direct us as to what we need to do each and every day in our relationships and with our health.
Dr. Williamson, while I have you, there was a comment that was made, but I turned it into a question. The comment was, so many of us disassociate because of trauma. And so because disassociate is not a common term that we use, I know it's in the mental health field. So I wanted you to share a little bit of what is emotional disassociation and how does that impact our mental health?
So a lot of times dissociation has to do with trauma. And again, we have different abilities and strengths in terms of how we cope with things. Sometimes trauma or an experience is so painful or overwhelming. It's like our brain figures out how to compartmentalize it, put it in this space, and we are emotionally detached from it. So there might be a time that we actually go for a period of time that we don't remember the trauma because we've been dissociated. And then something happens, you hear a familiar voice that reminded you of the trauma, or a smell, or see something. You're sitting there watching a movie, you're having a conversation with somebody, and all of a sudden the trauma comes back. So then you are reunited with the trauma. So dissociation is a way to explain our brain of compartmentalizing, trying to figure out how are we going to manage this trauma until our brain and our emotions are able to be in a place that we can process it in an appropriate way.
Thank you so much for that. Jasmine, question for you. You talked a lot about healing our wound. The question is, what tools do I need in order to find a place of peace within my body? So how can women, before birth, after birth, how can women, during pregnancy, before pregnancy, how can women find peace within their bodies so that they are ushering in the process of healing?
Ooh, I love that question. The first step is to do an honest evaluation, I say, an honest evaluation of your reality, right? Like doing a very honest evaluation of your reality and really discovering what is bringing joy into your life, what is not bringing joy into your life, what brings a sense of peace, what brings stress and tension into your life, because we all have choice. We all have the power of choice, and we can choose to eliminate what no longer serves us. There are so many things that we can do to take care of our body, and this is the fun part. We can explore. We can explore different avenues. For some people, it's dance. I love to dance. Listen, when you move your wombs, let me tell you why I'm so grateful to be a descendant of the amazing continent of Africa. When we move our hips, things change. And so twerking, that's something that wasn't invented in the United States. We've been doing that for years and years and years. But the beauty of twerking is that we are moving the womb, and we want our wombs to be fluid. Our womb should always be fluid. Our womb is all water, right? So we don't need stagnation there. We need movement, and dance helps us to loosen up our wombs. It helps us to loosen up any stagnant energy so that it can release itself, okay? Some people love yoga. Yoga is an amazing way to connect with the body and to the mind. Some people like to receive a massage. It's all about finding what works for you. Now, the second part of that is doing what works with you with conscious awareness, right? So if I'm dancing, I also need to be mindful of what I'm feeling in my body, right? Where is my body showing me that I have tension or stress? Is my body showing me that I am liberated in certain parts of my body? For an example, if you work a 9 to 5 and if you sit at a desk all day, your shoulders are usually really, really, really tight, right? Your lower half is probably really, really tight too, because we're stagnant throughout the majority of the day, right? So being aware of where we're holding on to that energy in our body lets us know how and where we need to move. So you can do so many things. Another thing that you can do to connect you fully to your body, if you do not want to do physical activity or strenuous activity, you can just breathe. Taking a deep breath in. And when I say breathe, I mean breathe from the depths of your womb, the powerhouse. Breathe in from the depths of your womb. Pay attention to where you're holding on to any tension or stress in your body, and give yourself permission to just release it, right? Can we do that together? Can we just breathe in, depths of your womb.
Ooh.
Pay attention to where you feel any tension or stagnation in your body. And when you exhale, give yourself permission to release it. As simple as that. As simple.
Yeah.
We always to our breath. No matter if we can't dance in our office, if we can't dance in our office, we always have access to our breath. And the breath is so powerful. Number one, it keeps us alive. But it comes directly to the power of God. God has given us this breath. So whenever we need to regroup or reconnect with ourselves, we simply need to just be aware when we breathe. That's it.
Can I tell you that the Hagar inside of me just twerked, just breathed, just did a whole bunch of stuff?
Yes.
I'm just saying. Ooh, Lordy, yes.
Amen. Elmira, this question is for you. We're in this conversation in terms of body, and oftentimes I like to think that Black women in general, we tend to ignore our bodies because we're so much pain and we don't know what to do with the pain. So we just ignore it and we live in pain, and it becomes our normal state of being, right? To live in pain. So someone said, so much tension within my spirit and body. What methods do I use to counteract that? So much tension within my spirit and body. What methods do I use to counteract that? You're on mute.
Okay, I would say, number one, it's almost bringing to light some of the things Jasmine mentioned. Number one, we have to recognize, where is this coming from? Where is this tension coming from? And we have to be honest about it, because that tension could be coming from your husband. It could be coming from your job. It could be originating from your church, wherever it is. And it's this high. And just like Sharesna said, we can't be ignorant to it. Because sometimes they say ignorance is bliss, but it's really not, because if we let it persist for too long, it will turn into disease. So some things you can do about it is consult a massage therapist, one that you trust. So consult a massage therapist that you trust with your feelings, who has your best interest at heart. And I always tell people, when they're searching for a massage therapist, do interviews. You interview for a job, interview your health practitioners, because every massage therapist is not the same. You want to find out, is this a good fit? Is this going to be a person who's going to be able to handle the level of tension in your spirit, the level of tension you have going on in your body? Because you have to be able to counteract it. There's a thing we know as yin and yang. It has balance. If you're going too far on this side of tension and you never get any balance with relaxation, it's going to ultimately lead to death. We don't have, and the opposite of death is breath. Just like we talked about, we just breathe. You have to have balance. So search for that balance in your life. And to me, that's the way to counteract it is, number one, consult a massage therapist, do those interviews to find one in your area who is sufficient to provide your needs. And then number two, analyze where that tension is and bring yourself back to balance, because that's going to be number one in counteracting that. Because even if you can go this little bit, it's going to be okay. It's all about becoming better, not becoming perfect.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's right. Can I say one thing? I remembered a couple days ago when we were watching the Girl Trek interview with Nikki Giovanni, and Nikki was sharing how she had a stroke because she was just doing too much. And she was stuffing everything down, and she needed a good cry. She needed to find a place of rest, and she couldn't. And it resulted into her having a stroke. And so I think we need to be mindful of what our bodies are telling us, and we need to respond to what our bodies are telling us. If our bodies is saying there's too much tension, part of healing is really to paying attention and responding to what your body is saying, because your body's talking. If the person who asked that question, if they're sensing it, they need to find some way, somewhere to find a place of rest, a place to start doing the healing work where she can do the work and start the healing work. So that's what I would say, because our bodies are being impacted by it physiologically.
Yeah. So I'm watching the time. So I have two more questions and then we'll end our session. This question goes to Pastor Abe, but I also want to encourage Dilla and Yolanda, whoever, to answer it. This question is about the way in which Black women understand, or women in general understand, their worth as it relates to the theological lens that they've been given around womanhood. And so it's a two-part question. How do we lovingly address sisters who believe marriage is their savior from the Black woman's plight? But also not just marriage, what would you say to the sister who patiently waited to be in a committed relationship, and yet it hasn't come, and they're reaching an age where being a mother naturally through biological motherhood might not come for them? That is an experience for many of our Black sisters today. They did everything that they thought they were supposed to do. They were faithful in the church. They prayed, and they did all the stuff that the mother of the church told them to do, the preacher told them to do. And here they are reaching 40 and 50 years old, still waiting for love. And love has not come. And so that also means motherhood, natural motherhood might not come for them. So how do we lovingly address the sister who believe marriage is their savior? And what words of love and encouragement and even affirmation can we offer the sister who's been waiting and still waiting, and being married and even being a mother might not come?
Wow. Deep breath for all of the dreams, the visions that we are grieving. Sister, I see you. I hear you. I acknowledge you. I am so sorry. I am standing with you in your grief. I know, to the good church girls who are still virgins, to the ones who had sex and got saved and you've been celibate possibly for decades, you know, for those of you who feel shame when you are experiencing sensual pleasure, right? I see you. I am divorced. Okay, so I waited for marriage. I was not celibate before I got married. I unpacked a lot of religious dogma that was masquerading as theology around my body and my sensuality and my sexuality. And so I encourage you to begin to think about what your dream life looks like, imagining what you look like safe in your body on your own terms, because whatever it is that you're feeling is evidence that you are worthy of it. And so if you desire sensual touch, if you desire appropriate touch, if you desire to touch yourself, like, that is good and holy. Embracing your sexuality does not make you a hoe. It makes you a human. Sexuality is a gift from God. It's the abuse of sexuality that's often male sexual violence that is evil, that is demonic. And so what has been liberating for me on my journey is reclaiming Christianity as an African traditional religion, as looking at it as not this oppressive American white supremacist anti-Black woman faith tradition, but what embraces us, like my sister Jasmine was talking about. And we were using our buttocks in worship in ancient West Africa. There is no separation between what's sacred and secular in ancient West African spirituality. And when you look at Jesus, who was a poor North African refugee revolutionary who had an African mama and African aunties, which means he was raised around Black women, right? We have to acknowledge that we are centered in this text. We are centered in this faith. And so your desires are natural and God-given. And that is a gift for you to explore when you are comfortable. And so for those of you who are, wanting to be married, begin to do your own healing work around your body. Think about who it serves that you are not in touch with your body and your sexuality and your sensuality. Think about who it serves that you are married to the church and not to a man. Think about who it serves for you to tithe into a church that won't ordain women. Right? And then think about how that liberative model can be applied to your dating life. I do not recommend Tinder. I met my ex-husband on OkCupid. I like Hinge because it's like a nice little, combo of the two. COVID dating is a thing, right? Maybe just open yourself up to conversation so you get to see that. Thinking through what you desire in a partner. And I remember being in college and writing out, he got to love God, he got to dress good, he got to be this tall, he got to smell good, right? Like, have your non-negotiables, yes. But also think about what it might look like to date someone who's not attached to every single item on your list, right? Just explore. And then lastly, marriage is a social institution, right? When I think of how we look at our grandmothers and their marriages, when they got married in 18, 19, 20, and they were married for 60 years, and we talk about marriage goals, she didn't go to school like you did. She don't got 3 degrees like you did. Like, she needed your granddaddy, okay, to like actually eat. And so it was a different time. It was a different culture. We can't compare that narrative to what we're experiencing now. Black women are the most educated and we're the fastest growing segment of entrepreneurs. Different game entirely. So let's rethink what marriage looks like for us. We can marry for love. We can marry for partnership. We cannot get married. We can have multiple partners. Like, the world is your oyster. And so if you are married, being married does not absolve you of being a part of any oppressive structures that that repress Black women, right? And so even if the beauty of womanism is that you get to show up how you want to show up. What works for you doesn't necessarily work for someone else. And so I just want us to be mindful that even if you don't have a desire to get married, you are still good. You are still holy. You can love God and love sex. You can be celibate if that's what you want to be, but don't engage in repressing your natural inclinations just because of religious dogma. And that's something that as a spiritual life and liberation coach, I'm happy to walk folks through.
I would just add to that, you know, I think we're not honest about the stories of our people, right? So in thinking about what Lyvonne was talking about with, you know, why it is our grandmothers got married, I think that's absolutely right. Like, we don't live in that context. But I also think that if we're being honest, there are some stories that we weren't told. We were presented with a meta narrative of purity and a particular kind of relationship that's not actually true. I was in seminary working on a genogram project before I realized that my grandmother, her first husband didn't die, which was the story that we had been told, that she left him. She had enough and she was done. So she got a divorce, and she had 2 daughters. She took her 2 daughters with her, and she married my grandfather because that worked better for her. She loved this man, and he took care of her in ways that she didn't feel like she was nurtured by her first husband. There is a kind of respectability politic that we have tried to live into in the Black community that has worked against the well-being of Black women. And so I think we just have to be honest with ourselves and with one another's about what our history is, what our story is, and that would free folks up to live their best life. The reality of the situation is, whether it's because of slavery, because of lynching, Black men have not been in homes in the way that they have been in a European context. Those things have been, and those things have been heaped upon us in really negative ways, but it also means that there is a resiliency in our community that doesn't necessitate that we live into these Eurocentric norms about relationships. And so I think that there's a way that we can tell that story and say there are good and wonderful and blessed things that can come out of good, healthy being the operative word, marriages. And you do not need to subject yourself to a relationship that is not good for you in order to be seen as worthy in this society. And I think that's particularly true in a society that doesn't hold us as sacred or worthy anyway. You have to get that for yourself and not worry about how people form those ideas.
Also, I want to say Elder May on the 3rd row did not get Deacon Joe because of her ham hocks. She got it because of her ham hocks, honey. So these unspoken stories, don't get it twisted.
I love it.
I would like to just jump in and make a comment here, because
tell the truth.
I think a lot of times the biblical perspective is presented as Eurocentric, where the Bible originated on the continent of Africa. And so the stories that we've been given have been given from a certain perspective. That doesn't negate what the Bible teaches. It just means we need to look at the perspective from which we understand the Bible. And like our biblical scholar mentioned earlier, Yolanda, you said you have to read it. You can't just take what other people tell you from the pulpit. You've got to open the word for yourself. And as we open the word for ourselves, we have to have belief that God will communicate with us what God wants for us. And that may look different for every individual. Mm-hmm. Many times we are wanting things that may not be in our best interest at that point. That doesn't mean that it's not ever going to happen. But if we wait and let God lead us as we read the word, then we will get the proper perspective, again, instead of depending what other people tell us to be or to do.
And
I think the last thing I'll add on this is that we all desire to be in relationships. I think at the end of the day, you know, what I'm hearing in the question is relationships. Having relationship, you don't just, it's not only contingent on marital relationships, right? We can have all forms of relationships where we create love and partnerships around us. So it doesn't have to just be in these marital relationships. But I would say curate all kinds of relationships around us. Even the married folks need other relationships as well. You know, not just the married relationship that they have, because you can still be lonely in your marriages. You know, because truth be told, because we're talking about truth on this panel, truth be told is that, yes, you can have these other relationships where you don't feel lonely, because you can still experience loneliness in your marriages. So I love what you all just said, and I don't want to add to it, but I wanted to just lean in a little bit on the aspect of relationships. Like, we are relational human beings, and we need relationships. We crave relationships, but marriages is not the only way for us to have relationships, or we will die. That's not true. That's a lie.
Yeah, I want to piggyback really quickly. I think that we need to teach our young girls how to embrace sisterhood. Like, first, embrace sisterhood. Learn more about yourself through your sisters. Receive support and guidance from your sisters. Build a strong foundation of sisterhood, and also connect with your elders first. Learn from your elders. Let them teach you about the mistakes that they made, you know, when they were single, or, you know, when they were married. Learn from your elders and really embrace. I wish that we embraced the season of singlehood as much as we embrace being married. Like, really embracing singlehood, that time that is solidified just for you, to learn more about you, to heal, right? How many people get married that are broken? How many people get into relationships that are broken, right? So if we take the time to really unpack and to unload and to receive the love and the nourishment that we need to evolve into whole beings first, not half of a being seeking to be completed, it changes the dynamics of the relationship. So I'm an advocate for the season of being single. Once we fully embrace it, it's not always comfortable, right? It's not always comfortable. Sometimes you get lonely. You're never alone, but you might get lonely. But those are sacred moments for you to connect with you and to connect with your higher power. And when you're in a relationship or when you're married, though it's that can be a beautiful experience too. You encounter more distractions, and then you'll be missing all that single time that you had. So I think if we just embrace it and see being single as being sacred, we can evolve and be whole first.
Thank you. One final question for everyone. This was a question I sent to you all. As your final words of wisdom, as we close out tonight's panel, we have gone over our time. So I want to say thank you to each, and the juice is just so much. The comment section, y'all, is on fire. If you get any chance tonight to go to the comment sections, on fire. We have way more amens and ashes than questions. So thank you all so much for joining us and just offering your wisdom to this conversation tonight. As you close out, would you please name a specific area of grief that is related to this particular discussion? We might have already named it, but I'm asking you to name it again, a specific area of grief that's related to this particular discussion tonight. Then offer a word of wisdom that ushers us into a place to desire to heal and break free, to live beyond surviving. Help us to reimagine what healing and wholeness look like for Black women. So name a particular area of grief, then offer words of wisdom that ushers us into, we don't want to placate to assume that this discussion is a form of healing. It might be a form of healing for some, but we want to usher them to a place of desire to want to be healed. And what steps can they take in order for us to reimagine what healing and wholeness looks like for Black women? I want to start with Dr. Yolanda Norton, Reverend Dr. Yolanda Norton, as I look at the time, and I want to honor your time because I know you have another commitment.
I think I grieve all the ways that particularly Black women feel trapped in living into certain kinds of paradigms, right? That we've created a world where to be Afrocentric, to be single, to be without child means that you are less than. And so that so many people, particularly Black women, are looking for their worth in things that are outside of themselves. And then when you get the thing that you might desire, if you desire to be married, if you desire to have kids, that there is more trauma and grief heaped upon you because there's no safe space, right? I grieve that. And so I think that I'm looking for Black women to own their own humanity, their own space in this world, to love themselves first. You ask this question, like, what is self-love? I always think about love in the context of, is something so big that in the biblical text, they didn't reduce it to one word. You have 6 words in ancient Greek and 4 in Hebrew that try to get at this thing that we call love. But learning, I think the healing comes with learning to covenant with yourself, that Hebrew Bible concept of hesed, to covenant with yourself persistently in a way that protects who you are as God's creation, right? One of the things that I always say at the beginning of a Mass when I welcome people is, like, when I look at you, you're the thing that God had in mind when she looked out over the world and said that it is good, right? And so that if we could really live that as Black women, I think we would be better. The world would be better for it. And so that's the healing I want us to move towards.
Amen. Amira.
Okay, had to unmute myself there. Okay, grief for me, I talked about the scars. We got to let go of the scars. It's wrapped up into that regret. A lot of times we have regret because we're living in the past. We got to let go of what happened in the past, those scars from the past, and be here in the present. Because this past may be 400 years ago, 500 years ago, or even so more recent as your own childhood. And so for me, the healing takes place when we can be proactive about what are we doing today? What am I going to do to change my present? Am I going to forgive my dad, which I had to do? Am I going to go get a massage? Am I going to take myself out to eat, even when I don't have a boyfriend? Those types of things. So I encourage you to do that. And what does a world of wholeness and happy and free and loving Black women look like? To me, it looks like utopia, because we are the bright and morning star in this world. And when we are whole, the world is healed and it's sunshine. And that's all. Because some people say that about me. They're like, oh my gosh, you're such a bright. It's because I've taken that moment to heal some of that scar tissue. And just so you know, you can contact me if you need a session with me. I do those international self-care sessions. Just contact me, Self-Care Boss.
Mm-hmm. And we'll put that in the comments. Selfcareboss.com, is it?
Yes, theselfcareboss.com.
Mm-hmm. We'll put that in the comments. Jasmine Dominique.
Hey, all right, off mute. There we go. I hold space for our ancestors that didn't have the opportunity to share their stories. I know my ancestors' stories have been transformed, and they continue to be transformed, and those stories live through me. And I hold space for all of the Black women that are walking this earth right now that feel like they don't have a voice or a safe space to share their voice and their story. I pray that they know that they are, oh my gosh, God's gift to this world. Where would the world be without Black women? And our stories, like our stories, even though they might be traumatic and ugly, somehow they are always transformed into beauty. And when those stories are transformed into beauty, we save the world. So I just hope that those women who feel like they are voiceless know that, that they are beautiful goddesses and that they are loved. And if you need a doula, just let me know. I am here. I will come to you. And if you don't have a doula and you need help finding a doula in your state, let me know and I will help you with that process.
How can our audience get in contact with you? That was my follow-up question for you. For those who are watching who might need a doula, how can we contact you? Or if they're not in the state of Tennessee, how can you help them find a doula in their community? What website or how can we contact you? And we'll put it on our comments.
Yeah, so I'm Jasmine Dominique on Facebook, Jasmine Dominique _is_love on Instagram. And you can go to my website. It's jasminedominique.com, and I will assist you with pure joy.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Pastor Babe.
Yes, beloved ones, grief is not linear, just like healing is not linear. And healing is your birthright. And so what we are learning from Angela Davis, Nikki Giovanni, Jill Scott, Erykah Badu, the world does not deserve Black women. Black women are going to save Black women. Womanism is going to save us. And so centering our narratives, our experiences is going to help us to heal, not just ourselves, but when you heal yourself, you heal 7 generations before you and 7 generations to come. And so I don't believe that the divine ideated a world where Black women needed to constantly be healing. But since we do need to do that work, then we can get into a position of power to hold the abusers, right? The institutions, the individuals accountable so that they will stop abusing Black women. Because if this is what we're able to do with the status quo, imagine what we can do when we are free, when we don't have the oppressor's foot on our neck, when we don't have to deal with male sexual violence, when we don't have to deal with a racialized pay gap. You feel me? And so love yourself, deal with your internalized oppression, any anti-Blackness that might be residing in you, because we have been deeply ingrained by these very Eurocentric, whitewashed schools of thought. So it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility to pull that out at the root. And so lastly, I'll say that I founded Beautiful Scars. It's a healing-centered storytelling agency focused on fostering pleasure and resiliency. And so many of us are operating from a trauma-informed narrative, but like Dr. Sean Wright at San Francisco State University talks about, we can shift to a healing-centered modality. And that calls us into dreaming about what our life could look like from a place of pleasure and flow and ease and joy, all of the things that Black women deserve but are often given the scraps of. And so I invite you into this journey to identify not just as a survivor, but a thriver, and know that you deserve pleasure, you deserve joy, you deserve all of these things. And so even if we have mommy issues, even if we have daddy issues, we have each other. And as long as we have each other, spirit, our ancestors, we gonna be all right.
How do we get in contact with you, Dr.
Oh,
Bennett?
yes, Lyvonne P on all the things. LYV as in Victor, ONNEP as in Proverbs.com. Lyvonne Proverbs on Facebook, at Lyvonne P on Twitter and Instagram.
Yes, we will have we will have that in the comments. Dr. Williamson.
Yes, thank you for having me. Unresolved grief, layers. And I think what we have to remember is we all experiencing trauma at different layers. That's just a part of this life. And until we stop and intentionally think about what we've experienced and how it's impacting our lives now, how it's impacting our relationships, how it's impacting our decisions, we will re-traumatize ourselves over and over. So stopping, acknowledging the different losses that may have happened in the past, the different losses and grief that we're experiencing now, identifying it, putting a finger on it, identifying the emotion connected with it, and then find a way to connect with the community, with our sisters, with our elders, with our spiritual leaders, with our therapists, our mental health providers, to get the help so that we don't re-traumatize and not have unrealistic expectations about our different phases of life. And then intentionally, as all the panelists have said, intentionally make decisions about eating healthy, about physical activity, about connecting spiritually, taking time to build up the positivity, connecting with our higher power in a culturally sensitive and relevant way to our lives. And then as we do that, we will live a life that is not written by somebody else, but is written by God as God directs us. And don't be afraid of mental health providers, because our brain is an organ that can have different problems, just like our stomachs, just like our womb. And we just need to move forward into acceptance that God has for us. Thank you so much.
Dr. Williamson, how can we stay in contact with you?
You can stay in contact with me on Twitter at Dr. Loida W, or you can reach me at my email at Meharry, lwilliamson@mmc.edu.
Thank you, thank you. And finally, our moderator for tonight. Again, thank you so much, Dilla, for carrying this conversation and moving it forward. Your final words of wisdom.
I'm just honored to be among y'all. I've been taking notes all night, if you haven't noticed, but my greatest burden, and has always been since I founded Elevate Her 7 years ago, was for Black women. My heart is heavy for Black women in the United States and all around the world. I hope and pray that there are some Black women, in Africa, South Africa, and Haiti, who are able to hear this live, this Facebook Live, and they can receive strength, and they can receive power, they can receive encouragement, they can hear that they are loved, and that they can, that they are created in the image of God. I hope they can hear the story of Hagar, and they can see themselves, and how God gave Hagar permission to name him. The only person in the entire Bible, a brown, enslaved woman in the entire Bible, to name him, "You are the God that sees." And I hope my sisters from all over the world knows that God sees you, God hears you, God knows your stories, God knows you by name. And he loves you, and he calls you worthy. Hagar was worthy enough to call God by name, that you are the God that sees me. And now I have seen the God that sees me. So I hope that you see the God that sees you as well. Thank you all so much for this time, this space. I've expanded. I feel like in my own, life in this moment, I've expanded. So thank you all so much for this time.
Dee, how can we contact you? Tell us about your organization.
I'm everywhere. So Elevate Her, we travel yearly, wherever the Lord send us. I was just in Uganda in January, and we have plans to go back in Haiti in July. We have a website, elevateherinternational.org. And you can find me on my website, julaprevlon.com. And I'm on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram as well. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. And Dr. Norton, I think we put the Beyonce mask on, but how can we contact you? We did put the Beyonce mask in our comments, but how can our viewers stay in contact with you?
So I'm on Facebook. The Beyonce mask is on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. There's beyonceMask.com. I will give a little bit of a teaser. We are working right now to do a COVID-19 pandemic Beyonce mask. So just keep an eye out that hopefully in the next couple of weeks, we will be live streaming a Beyonce mask. So yeah, that's how people can reach me.
Awesome. Again, I want to say thank you so much to each and every one of you for your time, for your love for Black women, for your passion, for the ways in which you show up in the world. We need you. You need to be heard and seen. And I'm just so grateful to offer this platform to you so that our community might see you and hear you and be encouraged to go a little bit more longer. There was a question that says, where do we go from here? What's next? For those who are watching, next week, I am excited to announce that next week I have a panel of all Black men who will come and talk about what does it mean to be America's target? What does it mean to be America's target? We want to offer Black men a platform to speak with dignity about their fears, an opportunity for them to lament. Because the reality is, as we close out Mother's Day today, there are so many Black mothers who are mourning because their sons are no more. Their sons and their daughters are no more. And so next week, I'm excited that we'll have a panel of Black men who will come to share their stories, to hear from them, that they might help us hear the fears, the grief, the lament that they hold and live into each and every day. So tune in for more information. Follow us on Facebook, Scarritt Bennett. If you're not following us, please follow us for more information. There are other events that we host throughout the month, throughout the week. So please follow us and we hope that you will join us. Again, I want to say thank you to this panel, and I want to thank all of the viewers tonight for sharing their evening with us. God bless you and keep you, and let us all continue to keep moving forward to that place that allows for us to be free and to heal together. God bless you and keep you. Bye-bye.
Bye.